Hi all, this is the badging video for the router table here at MakeHaven. So here we have the router table, and just to note that this is a particularly nice router table made by JessEm up in Canada, and we are very lucky to have acquired it recently. It's a big upgrade, and I'm excited to show you all of its bells and whistles. So most basically, a router table is just a hand router, which is really just a motor that you can put bits into the end of in a table, and you can raise it up and down, and it has this cool fence, and what that allows you to do is some more controlled operations than you can do with a router in your two hands. We're going to go over what some of those capabilities are. First, from a safety perspective, this tool is fairly dangerous. It's a very powerful motor spinning right near your hands with very sharp bits. So one of the most important things is to keep a very firm handhold on your work at all times so that it doesn't get pulled out of your hands and cause the part to get thrown or your fingers to be jeopardized. A good firm stance with your feet is important also to maintain your balance. And as with all tools in the wood shop, you want to make sure that you have no loose strings, hair, etc. that could get near the bit. You're wearing eye protection and ear protection if you would like. Before we get started with actually using the tool, I'm just going to go over some of the parts. So here we have the main table, and this is the lift that's built into the table. It has a few cool parts to it. So here, this red ring is a table insert, and you can have different size table inserts so that you can support your workpiece as close to the bit as possible, which is important. We have different size table inserts right down here in the spot labeled table inserts. The motor, as I mentioned, is mounted in a lift. So the lift can raise it up and down as you desire. The wrench to do that is right here. This is the height wrench. So when we grab this, we make sure that this arrow is in the unlocked position so that we can move it, and then just inserting the wrench in here allows us to raise it up and drop it down. These numbers here are not an absolute position. What they are is a relative position. So if you know where your bit is originally, then you can increase it or decrease it by a certain amount. So a full turn of this wheel is 1/16 of an inch, which means this has very fine increments to allow you to slowly get closer to the amount of wood that you're trying to take off. When you're satisfied with the height of the bit, then you can put the wrench right in here and turn this very satisfyingly to the locked position. Here we have a guard, and so this can move sideways as well as up and down. So you can have it over your workpiece, and then this directs the vacuuming, so it does a really good job of sucking up the dust. You just tighten these knobs in the position where you want it. Speaking of dust, we have a vacuum connected that turns on automatically. So it's controlled by this box, and when the router turns on, the vacuum turns on. You turn on the router by pushing the start button, turn it off by pushing this large stop button. Here are two collet wrenches that we'll look at shortly for putting bits in. This tool is the insert wrench, and this is what you use to insert and remove the table inserts. And these are some adapters. So most of the bits that you're going to be using here, probably 1/4 inch diameter shanks, but some maybe 1/2 inch. So most of the time you can put your bit into one of these adapters and then slide that right down in there, and then it will clamp down on your bit. But if your bit already has a 1/2 inch shank, then you don't need that adapter. These live right here. And the last accessory are these paddles. Whenever possible, you should use the paddles to make sure that your hands aren't more at risk than they need to be while using this tool. So that's what those are for. Up on the top again, we have this T-track slide. So you could put clamps in here. There are other T-track accessories that you could slide into this to take advantage of. Similarly, there's a T-track up here, so you could attach stops or feather boards or other attachments, which you might get in the future, which would allow you more control and precision when you're making cuts. On the side here, we have another positional marker. So when these are both set right to 0, like that, and the other one is also set to 0, then we know that our fence is perfectly aligned with the center of the bit. And so that can be useful sometimes. And then you might want to, move that up or down depending on what kind of cut you're doing. We have these lovely metal knobs that clamp our fence firmly in place, just like that. And then we also have these face plates in our fence, and these are movable. So I'm going to slide this dust shoe out of the way for 1 second so that we can see here. If you want to have support really close to your bit, then you can come back here and loosen up these knobs and slide these face plates closer or farther depending on what you're trying to do. I'm going to tighten these back up. So here we have a few different kinds of router bits, and there are a few differences between them. So as we noted before, this one has the 1/2 inch shank, where these two have 1/4 inch shanks. Also, these two have bearings on the top. And what the bearings do is they act as the fence. So when you're pushing wood through the router table, you can push up against that bearing. And what that does is it makes sure that you're referencing perfectly off that point. And what these bits are both for is for doing edge operations on your piece of wood. So when this bearing is pushed up against the edge, this radius is going to be applied perfectly to the edge of your piece. Versus a bit like this that does not have a bearing, and for this you need to use the fence. So this could create some sort of pocket or dado or slot in your piece of wood, and the piece of wood is going to be pushed up against the fence, and you'll have measured the distance that this bit is from the fence to know exactly where your pocket is going to go. So here we have this bit that has the bearing on the top. It's the one we're going to start with. And when we're trying to figure out what it's going to do to the wood, you just kind of look at the profile and try to imagine what the inverse looks like. So we can actually go over to where all of the router bits are stored to get a better sense of what that's going to look like. So in this box, you can see that this shape is the OG bit, and it's going to make that kind of design in the edge of the wood. So maybe for a picture frame or some kind of edge detail. You can also see all the other different kinds of bits that are available and the different shapes that they make, as well as a more miscellaneous assortment over here. So to load this bit into the router, we're going to loosen the knobs on either side and move our fence back. Then we can take the table insert tool, and this is backwards. You remove it by turning clockwise and pop this out. And now here you can see that this is a collet clamping system. So what that means is that when this nut tightens down, it squeezes on the collet, and that has a slit in the side. So when it clamps down, it pinches on the shank of the bit. If we were using this one, then this would be just the right size, so that'd be perfect, but we aren't, so we're gonna grab an adapter here. So now we can slide the adapter right in the top, like that. Now we're gonna put our bit in, and we want the bit to clamp below where that radius is, so it's only holding on to that shank. So we're not gonna go all the way down. I'm gonna leave, say, a 1/4 inch up at the top, something like that. Now, there are these 2 wrenches we can use to tighten the collets down. This one goes on the bottom, just like that. And then this one goes on the top, and we're gonna tighten this. So first I'm just gonna do it by hand to get it close. And then we're just gonna snug it up with this wrench. Just like that. Doesn't need to be crazy tight, but now it's on there. All right, so we can put these wrenches away. Now for the table insert, this one is a little bit bigger than we need, so we'll get a smaller one. So here's a bigger one, and here's a smaller one, and that's gonna fit just fine. So we're gonna drop down the spindle. So I'm putting the wrench right in here, down, down, down. And now we can take our table insert here, drops into place, and use the wrench to tighten it. There are arrows on here, so you tighten it by turning it this way. And then we'll put this wrench away. And these extra inserts right here. So for this kind of bit, it can do a few different kinds of profiles, but for the purposes of practicing, what we're gonna try to do is just use the profile starting at this tip. So we're going to want to lower this bit down so that that corner is flush with the surface, and we can do a little test cut before, if we were doing a real project, before going all the way around. Another thing we're going to talk about here is that this bit is going to spin counterclockwise like this, so that these sharp carbide pieces are going into the wood. And what that means is that on the router table, you're always pushing to the left. So when we have our piece of wood here, we're going to push to the left so that the blades are engaging like this. The reason for that is if you were to try to go to the right, these blades would grab it and throw it right out of your hands. And we certainly don't want that. You want to remain in control, and to remain in control on the router table, that means opposing the direction that the bit is spinning in. So we're always going to go to the left. The one random exception to that would be if you're routing the inside of some shape, then there would be points where you're going the other direction. For example, if this was a piece of wood that we were routing, then at this point in our travel, to engage that blade positively, to push against it, we would be moving our material to the right. So that's the only scenario where you move to the right, but in general you move to the left when using the router table. Another thing we're going to talk about here is that the size of the bit determines the speed that you want it to spin at. So the reason for that is that when you're cutting the wood, what you care about is how fast that cutting edge is hitting your piece of wood. And the bigger the bit is, the farther out that those blades are, the faster they have to move for the same rotations per minute, the same RPM. So what that means is for smaller bits, you want to go faster, and for larger bits, you want to go slower. If we take a peek at the bottom of the router here, you can see that it has labeled for the different switch settings, the speed that it'll go at. And so you can kind of feel it out, what feels comfortable. But generally I would say start in the middle, around 16, and then only go up to 21 for a small bit, and maybe consider dropping it down for a particularly large bit. So this bit I would call medium, so we're going to leave the switch in the middle. And since this bit has a bearing, we don't actually need the fence for this operation. So what we're going to do is just open this gate up and move the fence closer just for the vacuum to be able to suck well like that, just so we get good dust collection. And we can move this here just like that. And so now we'll have to do minimum cleanup afterwards. So I'm going to start just by eyeballing the height here of our bit. I'm going to lower it. I'm going to lower it just until it looks about flush. And we'll give that a try and see how it looks. So now I'm going to push the power button on the front, and I'm going to move our piece of wood to the left for a little bit, just across the front of the router blades. You'll notice that the vacuum turns on automatically when we turn the router on. So here you can see that there's still a little bit of a lip right there. So we would want to lower that bit just a little bit more to get rid of that lip if we wanted a really smooth transition. So this looks great here. Looks like a nice smooth transition. So we're going to take the wrench and I'm going to put it in this hole and click it into place. So now it is locked and we can't adjust the position. So now this is tight. So we aren't going to worry about the vibration of the machine slowly moving it up or down on us. So now I'm going to demonstrate going all the way around this piece and how you're going to hold on really tight, especially around the corners, to make sure that you have a nice smooth transition. you can see we have this lovely edge, this OG around the edge of our piece, you know, even though it's a little made up. If you look here, you can notice a little bit of burning along the edge, along the end grain. And to solve that, we could sharpen the bit a little bit. So we could take a diamond file over on the sharpening bench and sharpen up the bit. Another option is to try increasing or decreasing the speed that the bit is spinning at. And another one is to try increasing our feed rate. So sometimes if you're sitting a little too long, then it's just rubbing there and burning. Another tool that I forgot to mention that's included with this router table lives right here. This is the leverage pin. So I'm just going to unscrew this. And the leverage pin goes right in this hole, or the hole to the left, right over here. And the purpose of this is to help you engage the blade with more control. So instead of just freehand going into it, what you can do is push your material up here and then slowly go into it. And in this way, you have, it's much more controlled, because right now I'm pushing firmly against there and I'm slowly lowering into it, versus kind of like, you know, just freehanding going into it and risk grabbing it and throwing it. So this is sort of a safer way of engaging your bit. Another point of note is that if you're removing a lot of material or the wood is hard, you don't need to go up against the bearing the first pass. So in your first pass, you could just go halfway, go all the way around, and then only on the second pass go all the way so that you're pushing up against the bearing. So now we're going to remove this and we're going to look at using the other kind of bit for making a pocket in the piece of wood. So we're going to move the fence out of the way a little bit, and to take this out, we're grabbing this tool and removing it. So we're going to put this to the side, and I'm going to raise this up so that it's easier to remove the bit. First unlocking, raising you up. So using these wrenches, this one on the bottom and this one on the top, we're just going to loosen it just like that. And with the collet, you'll notice that we loosened it so it's no longer clamping on that collet, but after loosening a little bit more, you have to push through another piece of resistance to pop that collet out of the cone that it's sitting in. So it just popped out, and now our bit is free. And I'm going to exchange it with this a little bit, and what this is going to do is make a little pocket or slot in our wood. So we're going to put you in and tighten it back up. And for this, we can again use this small table insert after dropping it back down. And I'm going to drop this down to a height that seems appropriate for making a little slot. So the depth of our slot here is a little arbitrary, but we'll say maybe a little lower than that. And now I'm going to lock this. And now the position of the fence is important. So we know that the edge of our material here is going to be pushing up against the fence. And so let's say we wanted our slot to be 1 inch in, the center of our slot to be 1 inch in. What we can do is move the edge of the fence here so it's aligned with 1 inch on both sides. All right, so here's 1 inch on this side. I'm going to tighten this up, and 1 inch on this side. I'm going to tighten you. And in this case, because this is going to be making a little slot going underneath our wood, most of the dust is going to come out the bottom. So our vacuum isn't going to be terribly efficient here. Also, we want to support our wood fully from the back. So I'm going to close this gap a little bit here and re-tighten the knobs on here so that our fence faces are not going anywhere on us. Okay, and just to check that our fence is nice and firm, and it is. So now what we can do is take our material and pass it through so that we are making our slot right through the wood. So I'm going to turn it on. few things to look at here. One, you can see all this sawdust that's still in this groove because the vacuum wasn't able to suck it out. And the others, you can see this little hiccup here. So what happened is that I was pushing really hard into the fence to make sure that the cut was straight and the piece of wood didn't move, but I inadvertently pushed the fence because I didn't tighten it down enough. So the lesson there is to make sure that you clamp down the fence really tightly so that it doesn't move on you during a cut. So the last capability of this router table that I'm going to show here is the jointing capability. So the way we're going to set up the jointing capability is by loosening both of the fences. And we're going to take these shims out from the back. They're stored nicely in their little cubby. And we're going to slide them into the outfeed side, which is this, because we're always moving to the left. So we're going to try to joint a 16th off of the edge. So here's the 16th marker, so we're going to stop right at that line. And I'll show you where it feeds in on the left side. So these are going to feed in right in these slots in the back side here. Just like that. One, all the way up to the line, just like that. And the other one, right until the stop line. Then we're going to clamp our back face. And now this face is a 16th of an inch proud of the surface. And you can tell because you can see that lip here exposed, and here it's totally flush. So this one's a little higher. Now that we've adjusted the fence insert outfeed so that it's a 16th of an inch proud of this surface, what we're going to do is align the edge of this blade to be flush with this surface. So it's going to act like a little jointer. So if you don't know this already, which is totally fine, a jointer is a tool that you use to take a not flat surface and make it flat. So we have a huge jointer in here, but this is a capability of this tool, so we're just going to show how it works. So we're going to line this up right here. I'm going to use this piece of wood as a reference. Just like that. And now I'm going to tighten down on these knobs on the sides. And what this is going to do is when we pass the wood over the infeed surface, it's going to get cut by this router bit. And then the wood, which is now going to be a 16th of an inch less deep, is going to be supported on the outfeed. So let's imagine if this piece of wood actually, had a cup to it here or had some kind of waviness along the edge. When we pass it over, it's going to cut that off and then be supported on the outfeed, and then we're left with a straight, flat edge here. So that's the purpose. So I'm going to raise this bit up. So I'm going to grab our wrench again from right here. Going to move it from locked to unlocked, just like that. We're going to raise this up so that we can engage the whole side of our piece of wood, just like that. Lock this in place so it doesn't move. I'm going to make sure all these things are tightened. And now I'm going to move our little vacuum guy over here. And I'm going to pass this over. So here we have a piece of wood that has a bunch of dings in the edge. I just made them, but we could pretend that this was just a wavy piece of wood and we wanted to make it straight. So, and in fact, this piece would be a little small to use on the jointer. So this is a good application of when you'd want to use this tool for that job instead. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass it over here, and you're going to see how when we pass it over after a few times, it's going to be straight. Because this is a somewhat precision operation, we want to make sure there's no dust here that's going to mess things up. So I'm just blowing off the surface so that it's nice and smooth. Power on. And just like that, we now have a totally flat, straight edge. So that's how you use the jointing capability. When you are done, you want to remove that shim so that the next person isn't super confused. So we're just gonna loosen these in the back, and I'm gonna loosen the fence to make it easier to get these out. And we're gonna slide them right back in their homes. Okay, and when you're done, you want to put the router bits back so that the next person can choose which bits they want to have in there. So we're going to raise this up by unlocking, raising. I'm going to grab this tool to pull you out. And our wrenches here. That was the first click, and now the second click right there. Pretty well. All right, and we're just gonna put this insert right back on the hook here, and then the bit is gonna go back where the bits belong. 3 last notes that I wanna make. We have the router table sort of tucked in here, so it has the sanders on one side and the drill press on the other, and sometimes you're using a large, piece of material, and so it'd be inconvenient because you're hitting up on things. You might need to pull this router table out. The floor here is not completely flat, so there are leveling feet adjusters on the bottom. So wherever the table ends up, you can adjust those to make sure that it ends up in a good place. Another thing is that sometimes dust is going to collect in these holes, these 2 holes, and it's important to get that out because if you don't, then you're just going to be engaging a little bit and you're going to smush up the metal, and we don't want to strip out that metal. So if wood chips do get in there, then you can just grab the air hose that's hanging from the ceiling and use it to blow these holes out so that the wrench can sit nicely down in there. And then last but not least, when you're done, as with all tools, you need to make sure to do a great job of cleaning up.